Okay, so in this lecture, we're going to talk about section 1 of chapter 2. This chapter covers the first model that we're introduced to in the book, which is the model of the production possibilities frontier. That model describes how economies take resources or factors of production and use them to produce outputs. This is the first time that we'll talk about production. And so we'll define the three factors of production, but there's another term defined in this section, and that is utility. And so I want to first say a couple things about this concept of utility. So the definition is the value or satisfaction that people derive from the goods and services they consume and the activities they pursue. And going back to a previous chapter, we talked about the definition of economics. So I'm going back to chapter 1, section 1. And they talk about scarcity, you'll recall here. Our resources are limited, but our wants, our desires for things that we can produce with those resources are unlimited. We would always like more and better housing, more and better education, more and better of practically everything. Do you all agree with that? I'm not sure that I don't have a right or wrong answer for you to that. But what I'd like to say is, this is more, I like to think about that, saying that people want more and better of everything, more as an assumption that economists make about people rather than a statement of fact about every single person. Because there are, for example, Buddhist monks who live in monasteries who don't want more and better of everything, right? So it's not a statement of fact about every individual, but again, it's an assumption that economists make about people. Now, another assumption that economists make, we talked about in chapter 1, section 2, is that individuals maximize, right? They're rational. Let me scroll down a bit so you can see this whole description. The second one, thank you. Individuals maximize the value of some objective. And they define their objectives in terms of their own self-interest. So what do you think is their objective? To maximize what? I'll give you a hint. I said it a moment ago. Individuals. Firms make profit. And you would be correct if I asked, what do firms maximize? Economists assume firms maximize profit. Utility. Thank you. So economists assume individuals maximize utility. And that is, these are the two main groups in society, right? Individuals and households, and then firms. And so people derive value or satisfaction from consuming goods or services, and this is utility. You could think about it as pleasure. Now, there's something a little bit hedonistic about this assumption also, because certainly individuals are pleasure-seeking, but it's not that we're going through life only try to seek more and more pleasure, right? We also sometimes care about various ethical issues and so on. So again, these are not statements of facts as you might be, you might think as reading this, but rather I would put them as assumptions that economists make. Okay, now, but the main part of this chapter are the three factors of production: labor, capital, and natural resources. I think it's straightforward for you to read this on your own to determine what they are, but essentially everything that you can imagine, any good or service that you can imagine, is produced by using these three factors. So think of anything. A pen. It needed ink, right? And maybe that ink is, part of it was from a chemical taken from the ground, which is a natural resource. And then you also needed a machine to make the pen. So that's capital. Capital is a factor of production that has been produced for its use in producing something else, right? So the machine was made to make pens. And finally, you had labor. People had to operate the machines, drive the trucks to deliver the pens, and so on. So these three factors go into producing everything. But think about labor a little more carefully for a moment, because it's not only driving the truck, right? The muscles involved in steering the wheel. You also have to have some skills, right? You have to know how to drive, know how to read traffic signs. And for other occupations, like being a brain surgeon, you have to be highly trained, right? Economists call that type of training human capital. So whereas the machine that makes pens is physical capital, the knowledge and skills that humans possess is called human capital. So labor, we think about just as the muscular, or like the physical acts of doing things, but in doing anything, it does require some knowledge, and that's human capital. So you guys are here in college now, building up your human capital. But how do these factors of production come to be combined into goods and services? Well, the answer is the entrepreneur. And the entrepreneur is a very important actor in economics. But I would let you in on a fact of the economics profession. We have not focused on the entrepreneur as much probably as we should have. So for example, if you do a Control F and search this book, you might think entrepreneur would appear many, many times. In fact, it doesn't. It's difficult in some ways to analyze entrepreneurship through economic models. And so as a result, economists haven't studied it as much as they probably should have. But if you're interested in entrepreneurship and you want to see what types of things economists have done, I would encourage you to Google an economist named Joseph Schumpeter. And he is famous for many things, including promoting the concept of creative destruction, where he talks about the new technologies. These are creative, right? Like when the automobile was invented, that was a new creation. But it destroyed something. And what did it destroy? The horse and buggy industry, right? There were people who made buggy whips who lost their job after the car took over, right? And the same thing with typewriter manufacturers. Many of them lost their jobs after the computers were invented. But he argued that that's a good thing, right? The computer displaced the typewriter, and we're better off for it. At any one time, when a new technology is making its way through the economy, some people are harmed by that. But on the whole, it seems that the economy is better off when new technology arises. So that is it for the first section here. Next, we'll talk about the model of comparative advantage. And you should read this case in point article, which talks about the role of technology in production.